really excited about today's topic because there's a lot happening and not happening and unhappening and rehappening in the space of leadership. And a lot of it has to do with external forces. However, as leaders, we need to be versed and skilled and comfortable with how we handle it from inside out. And I know that our experts today have varying experiences and ideas on this very topic. So, without further ado, I am going to pass the mic. And what I am asking the speakers to do right now is to introduce themselves so you know where they're coming from with their perspectives. And then each speaker is going to come right out the gate with a super golden, hot, spicy, juicy nugget that you can use right away as a leader. So I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. Cindy, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. Lynette. No pressure being the first one to have to give this hot, spicy nugget. So my name is Cindy Rodriguez Constable. I am excited to be having this conversation today because I am really passionate about changing the way leadership is looked at in the workplace and just generally in our society these days. Moving away from one thing is not the same as moving towards something else, right? So we have lots of examples of poor leadership, and distancing ourselves is not the same as advocating and demonstrating what good leadership looks like. So I'm a compassionate leadership consultant, and my framework involves curiosity, creativity, and compassion. So my one spicy nugget for you guys today is to have compassion be at the base of everything you do. So when that is the wellspring from which you draw, everything else is going to become easier. And then for me, you always want to lead with curiosity. That keeps you out of defensive posture, keeps you open to new ideas, helps you continue to explore and to express that compassion. So start with curiosity instead of, shutting conversations down or thinking that or you've already heard it or you have a position that you're, well versed in. Curiosity for me is the bridge. That if we can continue to have conversations that are rooted in compassion, that's where creativity will kick in, because then together we can come up with solutions that rise the tide and lift all ships. So my name is Cindy Rodriguez Constable, and I am complete.
I love that compassion. That I absolutely love that we started with something that is internal and not external, not pointing fingers. And for those of us who've consulted in leadership for a long time, we know that we're often called in and the leaders are pointing fingers at everyone else. And so I love that we started with ourselves. Keisha, pass the mic to you, and then would you pass the mic to Megan for me, please?
I will. Thank you so much, Dr. Lynette. Cindy, it is great to meet you. Megan, I am looking forward to a great conversation from both of you. So my name is Keisha A. Rivers. I am the president, founder, and chief change officer of the CARS Group, where we specialize in the people side of change. So we really work with leaders to equip them to embrace, manage, and lead through change. And most of the time, our clients are executives who are in charge of a change initiative who come to us to help us to be able to work with the rest of their leaders to guide their people through a change event or a change process. So my nugget that I want to share with you all is to kind of shift your mindset around what change looks like and what change is and how it shows up. And I love to say that change is a process that begins with an event. And most people understand that there's something that happens, a challenge or a issue or something like that. And then they jump from here's the challenge or the issue that's staring me in the face to what do I do about it and what actions do I take? That's going from the catalyst to what I call the next normal of application. Instead, I want you to open your minds to the second part in the process, which is the shift of transformation. Change does not happen because we are doing something different. Change happens because we are thinking about things differently. And so, as leaders, I want you to think about this question of, how do I need my people to think in order for them to do something different or something better? And that is my voice, and I will pass it to Megan.
What a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dr. Lynette, for inviting me and for hosting these really informative, rich Wednesday happenings. And it's a pleasure to be with you, Keisha and Cindy. I'm looking forward to this. And I'm already jotting down these hot, spicy nuggets. I'm like, oh, I'm already learning. Let the learning begin. So I do one-on-one work at present. I do some group work, but mostly I've been for the past 4 years focused just on leadership one-on-one. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of work within tech companies in Boston, doing what I was calling conscious leadership work, which sort of merged self-awareness, meditation practices with leadership. So how do you really enroll your body before you have a challenging conversation? How do you sort of take command of your nervous system so that you're, really rooted and planted and not going to be thrown around, sort of like emotional equanimity, if you will, during difficulties. And we've all seen it enacted where somebody is surprised or there's a shock to the system, like that change that you mentioned, Keisha, that happens, and someone just really stays calm and stable and says the right words and gives the right storyline to everyone. And it can really shift things when there are challenging waters. And I think that really comes from our ability to know ourselves as a leader and to know our strengths and weaknesses. And I think that sometimes that's a place where, when we've sort of moved up the ladder in power positions, where sometimes knowing one's weaknesses can be difficult. Other leaders I work with hyper focus on their shortcomings, right? So it can happen one of two ways. But if we're blindsided and we don't realize where our shortcomings are, they will come up and sort of nip at our heels. So knowing oneself is really key, and then knowing the words, because as we know, the power of language is so profound that the words that we use cause a physiological effect in the listener. And it sounds like a heavy weight to bear, oh goodness, but it's actually really good when we slow ourselves down enough to think about what word choices we might use for the best outcome. And so know oneself and know one's words, I think would be my little spicy chicken nuggets. Yeah, so that's my response for that. So I'll pass the baton back to you, Dr. Lynette, for this little Olympic leadership game.
Thank you, Megan. That was so much fun. I really loved the fact that you went even deeper with this internal space that we're talking about when it comes to leadership, because so many people are very ready to, again, take more classes, do more. That's it. That's what I want to share. It's not do more, it's be. It's who you be. And each of you has alluded to that in different ways. And I really want to go back to Keisha for a moment. But before I do, I'd love to welcome Adriana is listening. I believe it's Katura. For whatever reason right now, I have a banner that is blocking people. And so I actually cannot see our listeners. So that being said, to my speakers, when you get ready to speak, if you could take a moment to welcome some of the listeners that you may be able to see, because I cannot see them. We always want them to feel welcome and part of the conversation. I appreciate that. And so, Keisha, I want to go back to you for a moment because I heard you once say something to the effect of, and I would love for you to expound on this. You said that people, leaders, they need time to release who and what they were to make room for who and what they are becoming.
Yeah, that is exactly right. In this journey, and I want to say welcome to Katora. It's great to have you here. I There are a couple of things. Change is a process, as I said, that begins with an event. And one of the things that I have started doing ever since I turned the illustrious 50 is I refer to myself as Keisha 5.3. I'm 53 now. And I started doing that because a lot of times as people, and especially as leaders, we assume that who we are as a leader in our first year is the same person as a leader that we are in our third year, in our 10th year, in the different roles that we have. And I think it's very important for us as leaders and for people who work with leaders to have them understand that the leadership position is not the destination. It's just the beginning of the journey. And so you have to be willing to let go of who you thought you had arrived to be in order for you to be open to developing and growing and becoming that next iteration, that next version of yourself. The same way your software updates on your computer, your phone has a new operating system and a new update that patches things. You want to constantly be learning and evolving and letting go of that destination where you thought you had arrived in order to be open to all of the nuances and the new things that you're learning and you're growing into as you experience more, as you engage more, and as you learn more and start to think and grow differently. It goes back to that shift of transformation. Our minds should always be growing and developing because we should always be learning. And as leaders, if we're not constantly going back and letting go of what we thought, we're never going to be able to lean forward and embrace the possibility of what can be. And then I will pass that to Megan.
Well, I love it. This is really, yeah, really good. I love not a destination and lean forward into the new you. If you were sort of consciously writing who you want to be, which I love it because it isn't static, is it? It's this emerging thing. I think what strikes me in that is really the concept of seeing the best in others as well. So, oftentimes, and this is just a snapshot from behavioral science, specifically within org structures, is we don't want to assume the person in front of us needs what we need. We want to sort of, as a leader, tune ourselves, and I know we're talking about being, but I guess right now I'm talking about being for other, right? So how we show up for the other person. We don't want to just assume that they are who they were last year, or they are who they were on their last, disciplinary action, or, we have these sort of bumps in the road and stuff. It's like, no, we actually want to look at their performance in the moment and even speak to and, believe in them in a way of something they might not even be able to see yet. And I think we forget this, and oftentimes in most of our relationships, is we sort of see a static, almost timestamp of who our partner was, or who our employee was, who we are, versus looking at it and saying, let me see the potential and let me speak to that in that person. And I think that's such a beautiful way to be in the world. I think, and with that, I'll see what Cindy has to say about that.
Thank you, Megan and Keisha, for your contributions. I want to kind of touch on a couple of things that you guys said. Megan was during your introduction about words. I've been using the hashtag words matter since I got on Facebook, I don't know, 2009 or 8 or whenever, and whatever dinosaur age that was that we that we all started, moving over to social media. And I think we are seeing that evidence, if you will, of that play out more and more and more. Now, those of us who do this work, we've known for forever that words matter. Which words you choose to use, the context in which you choose to use them, all of those different things. And as leaders, I think it is imperative upon us, as Don Miguel Luis said in his book, The Four Agreements, be impeccable with your word. Because at the end of the day, if you want people to take you at face value, to take what you have to say as a good thing, you want to be impeccable with your word. So we have to think about, the kind of the history of the words that we're using, the language, the way in which things are framed. This is why we know what a dog whistle means and things because words do really, really matter. And, to touch on some other things that you guys talked about in relation to, being the change you want to see, right? And I know it can sound kind of cliche, but the way I see it is change actually happens in an instant. When you have made the decision to change, that's the moment that things change, because you have consciously, and one of you mentioned being, conscious leadership, you have consciously decided to be someone different. And from that moment forward, everything that you do is towards that new identity that you've chosen, if you will. So for me, change actually happens in that instant. If change does not occur, then you have not actually made the decision to change. You might be hedging your bets or holding on to plan B, or however you want to describe that. But realistically, for me, the moment I've decided to make that change is when the change happens, because I have decided that the prior path or the prior version of myself is no longer going to show up in this scenario or in these situations, in the workplace, at home, whatever the case may be there. And then also, as it relates to speaking life over people, speaking things into existence, I'm very much a fan of that. But I also want to acknowledge the fact that as leaders, because Dr. Lynette did kick this off talking about it being an inside job, right? And so you have to do the work on yourself. So what I have learned over the years is that at times in my life, when I have needed others to behave a certain way in order for me to feel comfortable, or however, in order for me to garner some feeling, that was a sign of where I still needed to do the inner work, because I don't have control over anybody else's words or behaviors. I only have control over my own words, my own behaviors, the way that I respond, right? And I can choose to respond instead of react. I could choose not to respond when someone has been ugly with their words. So for me, it's just remembering too that if I start to focus too much on policing the behavior of others, I have more work to do, and I need to go back inside and figure out what inside of me is struggling so that I can be an example instead of trying to force that example on others. And Cindy, and that I'm complete.
That was awesome. There was so many golden nuggets that came through from each speaker's perspective. And as I sat and listened, and like Megan, taking notes just like you, it made me think about, actually, Megan, in fact, Megan has a concept, an idea. She can share all of this with you, because I don't want to call it something inappropriately, but what it is called, I do know that, is human technology. Something that she talks a lot about, and with that, something that Megan refers to as biohacking performance. I think this is a great time to hear more about that, Megan, because we are really talking about leaders, the inside. How do we change? How do we make the decision, as Cindy said, to change? it sounds simple to make the decision. However, there's really a lot that does go on with our body and our nervous systems and all of that. And so, Megan, I'm passing the floor back to you. If you can make sure to greet some of our new attendees, I would appreciate that.
Yes, thank you. Well, I want to take a moment and welcome Katura and Keisha. Welcome, ladies. If you, consider yourself I just want to say thank you for tuning in. And you may or may not know there's ways to engage with us. You can ask a question, you can react. There's little buttons that you can play around with. If you like something, you can do a clap. So I want to welcome you both into the conversation like that, and thank you for being here and listening. And I know the recording also will be up later, because I've done that a few of these weeks. I've gone in later and listened, so that's also a nice resource. But yeah, so thank you, Dr. Lynette, again for having us and for prompting us with these really juicy, fun questions. So human technology, I wasn't the first person. There's a company actually that does leadership work. I forget if they're in Kentucky or somewhere, but that's their business name. But I really see human technology as almost a system within us to do some of these things that Keisha was talking about, Cindy was talking about. How do you deal with change, right? Like seeing it as that moment, and then, like I was talking about a little earlier, about like almost emotional equanimity, which I think is a requirement to be able to shift. Because as we know, if we're super enrolled in whatever is happening, that's when we might lose our footing and forget for a moment to step back, to think logically. If our emotions and basically our chemistry is too involved, then we can get lost in sort of the drama of the moment, and we can throw our system into a little bit of like a fight or flight, or we're in reptilian brain, all of those things, right? We're not in that prefrontal cortex, making grounded decisions, able to think creatively and communicate effectively. So I'll just give you like a high level of what my biohacking performance program is, because you can use it as a system, just to be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Haven't done these things, but it's a bit deeper than you have to actually practice it, of course, like any sort of behavioral change system. So the first piece of really our technology that we can use is to have a vision. And at this point, it can be cliche, because we are always here. You have to know where you're going to get there, and the compass on navigating a ship or something is super important. And if we're just 1 degree off, we can end up in a different country. And that sort of metering of where your North Star is super important as a visionary leader. If you're leading others along with yourself, you really want to make sure we get to the destination. So having that vision is something I've found with my work with high performers. A lot don't have clear, and we don't often ask ourselves, what do I really want? And the way that I sort of go a little deeper on that is, what do I really, really want on that moment where I say goodbye to this opportunity that life has given me? And maybe it's at the funeral, maybe it's when you're, sort of winding down your career, or jump to the last day of your retirement party, looking at it as like a legacy building thing, and also taking a moment to remember to remove the ego. Because so often our accolades, our accomplishments are built by what our parents, what our cultural implications, what we think our partner wants of us, whatever it is. We want to strip that all away and make it really truly about fulfilling our destiny, whatever that is for you, or your karma. So I like to go a little deeper on that, and I'm sure you can imagine. I could keep going, but I think I'll just keep moving. I don't want to take too much time. But then the next piece, right, is to activate the biochemistry on a daily basis to align with that vision. So it's a little bit of hypnosis that I use with my clients. So you're moving, it's much easier, I think, than meditation. And you move into sort of an astral travel where you travel down the challenges of the day, down the path of them, and you navigate them from that very centered position. And just like in the Olympics, where you would go through again and again and again in your mind, making that jump, right? The body and the chemicals in the system, all in the mind, right? It's reticular activating. The mind is prepared to make decisions based on that truth. So it's really important that we don't just go, okay, here are my goals for the day, but we spend time unplugging from tasks to activate that vision in a very biochemical way. And then the last piece of it, which is sort of the behavioral piece, is then in a moment-to-moment practice, like we were talking about, this sort of, being able to pivot in the moment for change, is really about looking at that weakness piece. So where is the place where I fall short? Is it anger? Is it I judge? Is it I blame? All of the things that we do as human beings. But we know what our weakness is, and we've got it sort of queued up. We're like, oh, I know my little thing I do when bad things happen, when stress happens, and I'm ready for it. And when something comes up that triggers me, I have a very quick, small system in place that can change my focus and change my biochemistry so that I'm moving, keeping that ship on that 1%, on that 1 degree, making sure I'm steering my ship from almost like a clean canvas inside, and not one that's overly emotional or stressed out. So I hope that did it justice, but that's like in a nutshell what the system I use for my biohacking performance, so that you can pivot on a dime. And and I'll just welcome in, we have a few new people, Aronica, Freda, and Kutressa that I can see. Thank you all for coming. I don't know if you caught all that, but I'm so happy you're all here. And I'll go ahead and pass the mic back to Dr. Lynette.
Perfect. That is perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for our attendees. We are grateful that you are here. Keisha, I want to come to you because I know that you have a book which is titled the same thing as your concept about all of this, which is equipping leaders for change. So Megan talked about preparing leaders for change from the inside out, from a more nervous system perspective. When you go into companies, Keisha, I know that you see all kinds of things happening with leaders who say they're ready and aren't ready, or leaders who aren't ready and know they aren't ready. What do you do to equip them for change? What does that look like from your perspective?
Well, thank you so much for mentioning the book. The name of the book is Equipped for Change, Doing the Deep Work of Transformation. And I want to get into some practicalities, if we will, because everyone who's listening, I know every time I go into an organization and I talk about the mindset shift and I talk about what's needed to make sure that we're allowing space for people to grow and evolve and become, everybody goes, yeah, that's all great, but I got KPIs to meet. I have goals I have to achieve. I have metrics I have to report on. So how do I make all of this happen, this inner work happen in the midst of all of the outer requirements? And so when we go into organizations and we talk to them about change, we do it in such a way as, you talk about putting the applesauce, the medicine in with the applesauce. So we speak the language of outcomes. We speak the language of KPIs. We speak the language of process leadership in terms of looking at the things that are done and the way that they're done, and how do we make sure that we've got the best methodology for the outcomes that we're trying to get to. And at the same time, we're asking those deep questions. What does success look like? Not in terms of a metric, not in terms of a KPI, but what does success look like in action? And then the second question that we always ask is, what's the impact that we want to have? And I always talk about impact because in a lot of organizations, you hear, they give the quarterly results, and they talk a lot about income. They talk a lot about revenue. They talk a lot about, we had a record-breaking year, or we had a record-breaking month, or here's our revenue goals. And they push really, really hard for those metrics that a lot of them are tied to revenue and are tied to income. The transformation that you want to see in your people, the transformation that you want to see as a leader, the growth that you want to see as a leader, the way that you want your people to start leaning into their influence and their zone of influence and understand their genius and the ways in which they show up, that has nothing to do with income or revenue or a lot of the metrics and the things that we measure. Instead, let's start thinking about the impact. What is the impact this is going to have, not only on the people that you're working with, but on your client, on the community? What's the ripple effect that goes beyond what you're doing, what this one person is doing, what this one department is doing? What's the ripple effect that goes beyond you to touch other people? Yes, the process of change and making a decision and being conscious and learning and growing and all of that is individual, but it does not happen in a vacuum. And I think that as leaders, we do a disservice when we don't recognize that a lot of the shifts, a lot of the change, a lot of the transformation that we want to see, that we need to see, is not something that is confined or relegated to an individual person. We are all going to have a ripple effect or an impact on everybody else around us. And so it is very important for us to understand the role that we play and the impact that we have on the people who work closely with us, as well as with the people we may never even see because they're not in our department, but they still are impacted by the things that we do. So when you think about this from a leadership standpoint, in terms of, if I was to finish listening to this call right now and this afternoon, what am I going to do differently with my team? Or what am I going to think differently about? I would challenge you to have two questions in your mind. One, what does success look like in action? And two, what's the impact that we're making? Because those are the two fundamental questions that are always going to need to be answered whenever you are looking at growth, whenever you are looking at shifts, whenever you are looking at transformation, whenever you are looking at doing or being anything other than what you are right now. What does success look like in action? And what is the impact that this is going to make? And I'll pass the mic back to Dr. Lynette.
Thank you so much, Keisha. I know and I knew that you had a perspective that was going to be so valuable to add to this conversation, because you're right. People are still focused on KPIs and things like that, and they're not necessarily ready to hear some of the other parts of what creates change. They're both necessary. Some people will come from this direction, some people will come from this direction, and hopefully we will all meet in the middle and impact what we would like to see change in our organizations, change within ourselves, and change within society. Now, Cindy, I know that you have something to add to that conversation. I saw you just blinking over there. And so I'm going to pass the mic to you, Cindy, so that you can comment on anything that Megan and Keisha said. But also, while you have the mic, Cindy, I would like for you, because it's very aligned with where we are in this conversation right now, you did a post fairly recently that we had a conversation in the comments about. And in the post, you were talking about the hardest leadership conversation you ever had to have, and that's the performance review. And I think that story or that situation and how you handled that as a leader is a great example of what Keisha just shared. So I'm going to pass the mic to you, Cindy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lynette. And yes, I did want to comment on this great conversation that we're having here related to all of the things. From the perspective of getting past the KPI, right? Like one of the things I've done for many years in my career is work on strategic planning. So yeah, I think I dream in KPIs sometimes. But from the perspective of moving beyond, right? So I use the acronym H to H a lot, human to human. And in the business space, we see B2B, B2C, these types of acronyms, business to business, business to consumer. For me, all business is H to H, human to human. Because at the end of the day, we are dealing with other humans. And I think a lot of times in business, there's a terrible adage that says, it's not business, it's just personal. And, I think that's kind of a terrible thing, or that's a way for people to behave poorly towards another person in a interaction or in a transaction and be like, well, it's not personal, it's just business. And I think that's a terrible scapegoat or a terrible cop-out to use, because at the end of the day, we are dealing with other human beings, right? And if we want to think about how we are treating this other person, those KPIs are going to be so much easier to achieve when people feel like they are being treated like a human, like they have value beyond their production, beyond their output. And I feel like we have just kind of, glossed over that, if you will, for some reason, and just moved straight to, what is the revenue goal? What is the KPI? What are we trying to do here? And unfortunately, we lose the conversation around people's humanness, which is why I always want to start with compassion, right? And when it comes to, talking with employees, having difficult conversations, if we are treating that employee like a person, then we don't have the issue of being unable to have a difficult conversation, right? We can look at that person as a human being, as a whole person. So when they're coming to the office and there's challenges and things going on, that's where I go back to using that curiosity, right? Trying to determine what is the root cause of the issue that we're seeing here, right? Is this person, having a challenging time? Is there something going on? Are they lacking a resource? Is there a reason that they're not, hitting the mark, if you will, that the KPI hasn't been reached? Instead of defaulting straight to, a performance improvement plan or some, writing them up, if you will. And the post that Dr. Lynette's alluding to is I, at one point had, and of course I've been was in management for 20-something years, but there was one time I had a team member, Alex, and he was struggling with performance issues. And I was new, so this is way back early in my career, right? So I was kind of dreading, like, how do I have this conversation with Alex about his performance, or his performance hadn't been measuring up, if you will. But I didn't want to damage the relationship I had with Alex, because we did. And if you've ever been an employee and your schedule, and your boss schedules a meeting, it's like that little bit of nervousness wells up in your gut, and you're kind of like, oh, geez, what's this going to be about? Like, what are we doing here? In the office, I could immediately see that he was like stressed, right? And so I thought, okay, well, I'm in the power position, if you will, as the superior. So it's my job, first and foremost, to ensure that I can put Alex at ease, right? That he's and afraid to, have this conversation for fear of some type of retribution, firing, or write-up, whatever might happen, right? So my first thought was, how do I set Alex at ease? What do I do? So I decided to open with a question. And the question that I asked him was, how have you been feeling about your work lately? And for me, that's why curiosity is part of my framework, because that simple question allowed Alex to explain, to express, and I don't want to say explain because I had an attorney that used to say, when you're explaining, you're losing. So I'm going to use the term express because, as Megan so aptly pointed out earlier, that words matter, right? So it allowed Alex to express what he was going through, how he felt things were going with the work, right? And then what was my job after that? My job as the supervisor was to shut the hell up and listen. And to listen through a genuine lens of compassion, right? Because I didn't know what Alex was going to say. He might have turned and said, you're a shit manager. That's why I'm upset, because you're awful, right? So I needed to be prepared to listen with genuine compassion and understand that the conversation I was about to have with Alex was not just about the work. It was also about the person behind the work, right? And so through that conversation, what I learned at the time was that, Alex's mother had been seriously ill, and he was a caretaker, and, there was a lot of stress being put on Alex's shoulders, right? So the conversation shifted from, oh, Alex, you're doing a poor job, to how can I support Alex during this difficult time, right? As the manager, as the leader, as the supervisor, as the person in charge, I feel like my job is to, set good examples, is to provide resources and allow my very competent employees to do their job without getting in their way. And so, during that conversation, it's like, what can we do? Do we need to temporarily adjust the workload? Did he need a flex schedule? What does that look like, right? And so this wasn't a one-sided conversation, right? This was a give and exchange of back and forth between me and Alex about what he felt like he needed to feel supported enough to be able to do his job in the best way that he knew how, right? So for me, that was one of the early times in my career that I realized that if I treated my employee like a person first, and I didn't just immediately go into criticizing their performance without any context around it, that we could turn this into a joint problem-solving session, right? We can tackle these challenges together. And that's where creativity comes in, because again, I was listening with compassion, I led with curiosity, and then creativity is the third piece where we can co-create that solution, right? We can brainstorm. What are realistic things that we can do to help Alex? How can I, unburden him in some way? How can I ensure that he felt supported, right? And so this to me was kind of like my first aha moment as a young manager in my 20s, realizing that, wow, this command control crap that's not the jam. That's not the way. The way is, compassion, curiosity, and creativity. That is the way. And so, Alex's performance definitely improved over the next, several months. He got the support that he needed. He felt understood. He appreciated his job, treating him like a person and understanding that he was an entire person coming to work and not just a cog in the wheel. And so that actually improved the relationship that I had, with him, at that time. So for me, it was just a crucial lesson. And I believe firmly that having hard conversations is an essential skill for anyone in leadership. And it's really an essential skill just in life in general. But, those interpersonal skills really in leadership for me are what make all of the difference, right? So, having the hard conversation is not just about being the one who's able to say the hard thing, right? That's easy. Anybody can blurt out the hard thing. For me, it's about delivering the message in such a way that you've built trust, you've fostered growth, you've shown your team that you are with them. So I guess that's my 2 cents. That's a long answer to your question, Dr. Lett. So I am complete, and I will pass the mic back to you.
Thank you for sharing that story, Cindy, because it really does happen so often that we have team members that are not performing, underperforming, less than performing, whatever is the politically correct phrase these days, because it keeps changing. And we need to address that. I have seen a lot of leaders that don't address it. They mumble and they complain and they shrink. They talk about it behind closed doors, but they don't actually address the person. The most popular passive aggressive action that I see leaders take is they send a mass email to everyone on the team about something that only one person is doing. And when that happens, the person that they're talking to usually doesn't realize that the message is for them, and everyone else who's doing well is annoyed or offended because they know who it is usually, and they know it's not them, and they wish that leadership would directly address the person instead of including everyone in the company in the toxicity. And so, Keisha, I'm going to come back to you. What are your thoughts about what I just shared as an example?
So I will say, and this is something that happens all the time. Everyone talks about, in the context of we need more development or more training around having difficult conversations. And when they talk about that, the framework is always how do we navigate difficult conversations between employees or between team members. As a leader, if you're not comfortable being uncomfortable, having these kind of conversations, then you're doing your team a disservice. And one of the things that one of the, I forgot if it was Megan or Cindy, I think it was Cindy, in terms of leading with curiosity and asking a question and then shutting up and not letting your ego be the one that drives your tendency to react instead of respond. Passive aggressive ways of dealing with things in a group setting instead of being direct is usually the hallmark of someone who does not have the inner confidence to understand and to be able to separate a emotional reaction or a response that someone gives from who they see themselves as being. And I'll put it this way. If you as a leader have a team member who comes to you and they say, you know what, that latest way that the latest process that you rolled out or the SOP that you rolled out is really not working well. I think this is too much. We need to take it slow and kind of go back and look at things again. And if your tendency is to react by automatically getting defensive and running down all of the ways why you made the right decision, instead of really listening and leaning in and asking the questions around, okay, tell me more about this, walk me through your thinking process with this, and seeing it as bigger than you, then as a leader, you have more work to do with regards to removing your ego from your role as a leader. And there are so many opportunities for leaders to get it right, but more often than not, because they're not developed in this way, and a lot of times leaders are not given the time and the space, the safe space, the psychologically safe space to be able to ask the questions that they need asked and to be able to sit with and do the interpersonal work. A lot of times we put people in positions where they're uncomfortable, they don't have a chance to lean in to be able to learn, and they don't have that psychologically safe space to be able to make mistakes. That's when we end up with leaders who are leading more so from a place of ego than they are from a place of curiosity and from a place of being able to facilitate a process instead of reacting to something that they see as an attack. And I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Lynette.
Thank you, Keisha, for sharing that perspective as well, because it's a challenge. It comes down to us being comfortable in this is interesting because we need to be comfortable with who we are, and we also need to be willing to be uncomfortable with who we're becoming. And being a leader requires both of those in harmony, in a song and dance. And a lot of leaders are not prepared to take that journey or to stay on the journey. Some take it and some don't last. So Megan, I want to pass this to you, and I would like to know or have you share what skills, what capabilities, what competencies do you believe are most important for leaders, and especially leaders who need to be future focused with all of the change that we have going on around us?
Yes, yeah, that's a really great question. And again, really overall great conversation. And I do want to welcome in, we have some new listeners. So thank you all for being here. We have Vet and Katressa, Veronica, and Katura is still here. Thank you. And Diane and Alicia, thank you all for being part of the conversation. And I just want to echo what Dr. Lynette invited everyone initially. If you want to leave any interactions or comments, we'll tune into those. And yeah, that's a really great question, because it is so challenging, right? The future visionary leader. Yeah, it's sort of sometimes is it learned, or is it is it a predisposed? Right? We need to believe that we are flexible and changeable and sort of plastic in that way, right? Where we can flex and become more future oriented. And then if you're not able to do that, I think the biggest thing is to be able to have some sort of outward in ability to receive feedback, or have a coach that can help you see what you can't see. And I think we all know that in circles like this, that we only have what we have inside, and sure, we can be on that perpetual growth pattern and drive to become better, but there are simply things we can't see. And sometimes they're our greatest gifts we just can't see because they're so close to us. But I think that it's sort of part of emotional intelligence is being able to feel feedback in the moment. So if you're delivering news, or you're having one of these difficult conversations we're talking about, or you're giving a presentation to your team, you can feel, you can sort of take an emotional temperature in the moment. Like if you're moving off track, or you've lost people, or like you mentioned, Cindy, explaining things, which I have a tendency to do, that you can go back, you can stop and let me tell a story, or let me ask for engagement. Where are you all at? How are you all feeling right now about what I just said? And you just completely, change what's happening, versus we've all experienced a leader who's just, they are not hearing it. They are just going with it, and you are part of it. It's sort of that tyrant way that can show up in little places. Sometimes it's just, change is too fast, or too much change too fast, and the tyrant comes out. And it can come out of anyone, with enough stress. But, really being able to say, okay, I feel like that meeting I just gave was off. What could I have done better? That takes that's a big leader, I think, that's able to say, how did I do? Could I have done better? And, or even, going to their coach and saying, okay, this is what I need to work on. I think that's one of the biggest things is feedback in the moment, feedback later on from your partner. Because I love what you said about Dr. Lynette, about comfy with who we are and uncomfortable with who we're becoming. And back to what Keisha said earlier, that we really have to lean into that becoming piece, don't we? We have to be in that almost that unknown of, am I going to be good at this? Well, no, you're not. If it's the first 5 times you've done it, no, you're not going to be good at it. So can you be good with looking a fool for a moment? You know, that's some ego demolition right there, isn't it? You're like, okay, it's okay, but it's and then that teaches everyone around you, like somebody mentioned, mistakes, and being able to be okay with showing your team that we can all make mistakes. I mean, you've got to be able to make them yourself. And I remember one VP at a biotech in Boston was they had a death on the team. Someone had been on the team 25 years. And he had been a very sort of, I don't know what the word would be, like austere leader, very buttoned up, appropriate. And he said for the first time ever, he broke in front of his team and he cried. It was one of his very close friends they become very close friends. And I said it was the most appropriate thing you could do, was to cry in front of them, and to show your human side. I think does a lot. It communicates a lot beyond words, just to feel like, okay, we're in a safe enough space that our leader can have emotion when it's very appropriate. Versus, I spoke with someone the other day. We were going all the way back to 9/11, and the person was consulting. I think in the building next door or on the ground floor. I forget. It was very close. And one of the people in the room said, no, we have to keep going. It doesn't matter that there was a plane hit the building. Like, we have to be here. We flew in for this meeting. And the consultant I was talking to, she was like, oh, I felt really off about that. But then I went with it. And then another person came in and interrupted and said, a second plane has hit. And she was like, at that moment, I spoke up and said, the only thing we can do is cancel this meeting. We have to cancel this meeting. There are people whose lives in danger. So it's like being able, that moment to moment pivot, I think, again, is knowing to trust yourself as a leader when, and almost knowing whether it's just an uncomfortable situation or are you just uncomfortable, but like, what is the right thing to do? And having some sort of architecture around, what are my values? So when things get tough, you can say, oh yeah, I put people first. I make sure everyone's all right? Going back to what Cindy was saying, that, what happened with this person personally has an effect on performance, not just running them over on KPIs or whatnot. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that I think is a really nifty sort of tool to have in the tool belt, which I feel like everybody on this call has this, but to really think about when we're working to create that visionary leadership, and we're looking to enroll people who may or may not be enrolled, right? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes people seem engaged. Sometimes we know they are engaged, right? Or disengaged. But one thing that I feel like is really key, and I'd love to hear what others think about this, is to really understand what that goal or that track of success sort of, and this is what I take from some work I did with negotiation, is to have a pretty good handle on what the other person wants when you go into that negotiation. And it's not always shaped as a negotiation. It can simply be, I need buy-in for this, this rolling out this new software or whatever, or this new marketing plan, whatever it is. And I don't think this person's going to have buy-in. Okay, so what do they want? Because some people, like it or not, you are playing to their ego. People don't want to hear that, but that's the truth. And you have to go in there and be like, listen, no, your role is going to stay the same. It might even improve. But as we know with adult learning theory, we need to know their why. And if we fail to see that in how we present change, then we'll lose them in the beginning. And then they're thinking about their agenda and what they have to finish for the day, right? Which is very natural. They're hired to do that. So just remembering that piece and dialing it back from what we want to achieve, and really folding them into the conversation in ways that make them feel like it's part of, somewhat their idea, or what do you think about it. But I think first meeting them where they are with their goal, and then folding in, like, how could you make this even better? What do you think about it? And I think we know this within change management theory, but I just wanted to highlight it because I think that, when we think of being future focused, we're asking people to do the unseen, the unknown, and not everyone's comfortable with that. Some people would rather just, be told what to do and then do it again and again and again. Other people are hungry for change and disruption, right? And knowing who you're talking to, I think, is key there. And I'll end with that, Dr. Lynette.
That was awesome. I love that share. Before we go into the last question, I want to see if anyone of the attendees has a question. You can raise your hand and I can bring you on stage. If you have a story, a question, anything that you would like to contribute to the conversation, now is the time before we go into our last speaker round. If you are not in a place or environment to ask a question, please feel free to do that in the comments on the event page. That's where we will go in a few minutes to a short after party. This is the way that we are able to engage with your questions, answer you in real time, and the speakers will also leave additional information as to how you can connect with them, work with them. In the meantime, please be sure to click on the speaker's face and follow them. Anyone who resonates with you, their style, their vibe, whatever that looks like, I would love for you to connect beyond this event. And so I don't see any raised hands. I want to go to Keisha, because Keisha, you said something which I think speaks very well to what Megan just shared. And your question in one of your posts said, do we do our people a disservice when we don't share our journeys and lived experiences that help drive home the concepts, strategies, and skills we want our people to embrace? The mic is yours, Keisha.
Thank you again, Dr. Lynette, for having us on this conversation today, and thanks to Megan and Cindy and for everyone who has been listening. So that post actually was prompted because I had a conversation with someone who said they think I share too much, and their rationale was that as a thought leader, as a consultant, as someone who goes in and quote unquote fixes organizations, and I'm the expert who's supposed to come in and I need to show people that I have it all together. And I told them, I said, it's actually the opposite. I said, by me sharing my journey of the things I'm thinking about, the lessons I'm learning, the things that don't turn out the way I expected them to, the things that other people may call quote unquote failures, which I just call restarts. If I don't share that, then there may be people who are looking at me and saying, well, I need to be perfect all the time. I can't lean into the discomfort. I can't be open to having to pivot and make, another decision. I can't be open to learning and to constantly questioning the way that I'm doing things and making sure I'm going in the right direction. So I do think you do people a disservice by not sharing your journey, not sharing the messes behind the masterpiece. If you don't do that, there's so much learning and so many good nuggets and so many things that you don't even know that could resonate or connect with someone else who's going through something similar because you choose not to share. Social media is by and large comparing your real life to somebody else's highlight reel, because we have a tendency to only share the good things. We have a tendency to only share the things that are going right. And if you look at yourself as a leader and you look at yourself as someone who has influence on your teams and in your organization, and if you are only sharing the aspects of your journey that are a part of the highlight reel, and you're never sharing with them any of the times when you had doubts, any of the times when you questioned whether you were doing the right thing, any of the times where you made a mistake and you had to go back and learn something new, any of the times when you had to defer to someone else to come in and help you with something. If you're not doing that, then you're doing yourself and your people a disservice. One of the quotes that I love, and I think it's John Maxwell, but I'm not sure. One of the quotes I love is that the role of a leader is not to lead people. The role of a leader is to create more leaders. And how do you create more leaders if you're not sharing your journey and your process of becoming a leader? We started off this whole conversation around becoming and the part of understanding the process of change and being able to lean into the unknown as you are figuring out who you want to become and learning as you are becoming. How do you create more leaders if you're not modeling for them what it looks like to become a new leader? So that's the question I would love to leave with you all. I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Lynette.
Thank you. As you were sharing that, Cindy comes to mind because there is a post that Cindy talks about self-trust. And I'm going to pass the mic to Cindy in just a moment because I feel like what you just shared, Keisha, and the ability to do that, to be authentic and to be transparent, if you will. That's a word I am not a fan of, but that's another show. And really show up in all of your challenges and all of your strengths in front of the people that you are leading, I would submit requires self-trust. And so, Cindy, I'm going to pass the mic to you. I would love for you to talk to us about self-trust and what role it plays in being an amazing leader.
Thank you, Dr. Lynette, and thank you, Keisha, for that great point or that question that you left us with. Definitely something to think about. For me, it's all an inside job, all of it, everything that we're doing in life, no matter if it's business, personal, relationships, it doesn't matter. It's always an inside job. And self-trust being one of those things, right? As we grow up and we're socialized, others put their expectations on us. Others make decisions on our behalf, right? And so, my name is Cindy, and I am a recovering people pleaser. The ability to trust my own gut, my own instinct for what is right, especially if it goes against the grain. And I think that's something that, those of us on the panel, have in common, that we are looking at the way things have always been done, if you will, and we're saying, yeah, no, I'm good, fam. I'm good. I don't want to do it like that. I have a gut feeling that things need to be done differently. And for me, self-trust comes with learning to trust your own internal guidance. And the only way that grows is through healing of, childhood trauma, generational trauma, societal trauma, all of the different things that play into, the life that we live and the world in which we have to exist. To learn to heed your own inner guidance. And as you heal those things inside of you, your ability to trust yourself grows. And, trust that you're not always going to make the best decision either, right? And that's okay. As children, we are socialized to believe that failure is bad, that getting something wrong is bad. And I think our ability to trust in ourselves is eroded primarily through our educational system that we have in this country that is, sit down, be quiet, do as you're told. This is the answer. If you challenge anything, the village is going to ostracize you. I think that's where a lot of the self-trust decay comes from. And as we go through and we unlearn those things, and we reprogram our own mind, our own heart, our own gut feelings, to really be able to trust that what you know to be right for you is right. And that's why, for me, H to H, human to human, dealing with compassion, because, compassion, curiosity, creativity, all of that is born of doing it for yourself first, right? You can only meet others to the extent to which you have developed yourself, right? And there's a saying that says, your income will never outpace your personal development, or something along those lines. But it's always going to be about coming back to self, right? If you're in alignment, with me and my spiritual girlies, you're in alignment with your highest and best self, you're doing, what God's got for your life, whatever your beliefs are, it is about trusting your own intuition that you've got it. And if you continue to move in such a way that you trust yourself to do what's best for you and those around you in that time, that muscle will grow. And trusting yourself also allows you to not take those defensive postures that we talked about earlier, to be able to demonstrate that growth. And I apologize, I don't remember who said it, but it's, we talked about putting the highlight reel out on social media and not sharing your real journey. Self-trust gives you the courage necessary to share the real with the world versus the highlight reel. Because you can say, as I was going along, I messed up this and I screwed up that, and this is what I learned from it, and this is how I grew. And faced with new information, you have the ability to change your mind. That's what critical thinking is all about, right? That's how science even works. We make a discovery, we're going along with, this is the information, new information comes to light, we do a new assessment, and we realize we have to integrate this new information in some form, which means we need to onboard the new information, we have to offboard the previous things that we thought felt, were accurate, and make a new adjustment. So to me, self-trust is kind of mission critical, and the way that you build that muscle is through your own personal development journey, whether that be therapy or spirituality, or however you go about bringing the trust back to yourself. Then you can move forward from a place of strength and a place of knowing, and also not fearing failure or having people be upset with you in some way, because you're doing your best. And if you've like I said, come across new information and you've changed a position, you have the ability to say, hey guys, guess what? I've learned something new, and this position that I held previously is not how I feel anymore, because it's not who I am anymore, because I'm now living into who I want to be instead of perpetuating who I'm not. So that's my 2 cents. This is Cindy, and I'll pass the mic back to you, Dr. Lynette.